Hello, welcome now to how to write a DBQ, APUSH style, or as I like to call it, how not to panic! Because I know you will panic, some of us will panic, but hopefully if you watch this review, I can help you give you a few tips on how not to do that. And again, hopefully you've watched already the review on how to write a thesis that comes before this. This is now how to write the actual DBQ. I'm going to try and keep this short and sweet and just go over some of the basics for us. Remember, document-based question, DBQ. All it really is an essay. That's all this is. We see that DBQ and we panic. We freak out. We think this is some sort of a mathematical equation that's going to force me to solve, string theory or something. And it's none of that. It's just an essay that has some documents that can help you write your essay. All right, so what do? Well, first of all, remember, you have 1 hour during the exam to write the DBQ. College Board suggests that you take 15 minutes to plan. Think about what you want to write and how you want to write it first, and then take about 45 minutes to actually write it. You do this by starting off by reading the question first. You can't answer any essay unless you understand what the question is. Remember, all essays are about the question. In my review on thesis, I really highlight that for you. You have to always stick to the question. What is the question asking? Remember, sometimes in a DBQ especially, they might ask you to do more than one thing. Maybe there's 2 things they're asking you to do. Look at key command words. Analyze, evaluate, to what extent, compare, contrast. What are the key command words that they're asking you to do in this essay prompt? Once you've read the question and you feel you have an understanding, especially if it gives you the time, remember they're also going to give you dates there to keep within a certain time frame. Start to brainstorm now. You're planning. Think of the things that you remember about this time period. Make a T-chart, thought bubbles, timeline, whatever it is that helps you do your planning. Doodle, I don't care, whatever it is that helps you, do it. So you say, well, I only remember 1 or 2 things. Well, then write those 1 or 2 things down. Maybe think in terms of that social, political, economic, and maybe that might jar your mind as well. Brainstorm for just a minute or so, and then start scanning the documents. Because you want to think about the time period a little bit first before you actually look at the documents. Then when you look at the documents, again, remember, this is an essay. All it is an essay. But now you have cheat sheets. That's what these documents are there for, is to help you think of other things that maybe you didn't remember. As you look at the documents, you can use the AP parts. In a few moments, I'll go over that with you again. Go back after you've looked at the documents for a few moments. Go back and do some more brainstorming. Maybe now you can add a few more thoughts or a few more points to your T-chart. Maybe there's some things you need to delete as well. Maybe you thought this was a certain time period, and now you see the documents and you realize it's something else. So you have to take out some of the things that you realize don't really belong. AP parts. When you're looking at the documents, think author. Who wrote this? Sometimes you might not know the document at all. Sometimes I don't know the document. The documents are put there sometimes to be kind of out there, like not anyone could really know this. But that author might give a clue. Who wrote this? Was it a person? Is it a magazine? Is it a letter? What's the author? The time and place is a giveaway as well. Think of where and when this was written. Was this written at the early stages of, let's say it's the progressivism. Is it written at the early stages or at the later stages of the progressivism? That helps you. People were more into progressivism in 1901, 1905, 1910. They're more into progressivism. By 1919, 1920, not so much so. People are kind of tired of it. Prior knowledge. Again, this is a cheat sheet. This is helping your memory jog, make you think of something that maybe you didn't think of before. Maybe a name pops in your head. Maybe a certain event pops into your head. The audience, who is it written for? The reason why, the main idea, and of course, always important, the so what, the significance of this particular article. Why is it important to know? I don't know if you heard that humming, but they're doing yard work in my backyard. All right, now you're writing the essay. Again, remember, you have to start off with a thesis. Now, I have a review on your thesis and what that is. So if you haven't watched that yet, please go back and watch that as well. Remember, a thesis is always in two parts. First of all, it's your argument. It's your actual thesis statement is your argument. What am I going to say? How am I going to explain this particular question? The part two is how are you going to go about doing that? Usually you come up with 3 categories. For simplistic sake, oftentimes I tell my students just say social, political, economic. You'll notice in a lot of DBQs, they'll put social, political, economic in there or some variation of that to help you write your thesis. Then you go to writing the paragraphs. Remember, this is a history essay, so you must have outside information, facts. You must have them. If there's only 2 or 3 of them, then there's only 2 or 3 of them. But you have to have them. The more facts you have, the higher the score you'll get on your essay. Then you also want to be able to explain facts. You don't want to just write a dictionary, right? All right. The American system was Henry Clay's political ideology on how to bring about internal improvements, roads, canals, turnpikes. All right, that's nice. That's a nice dictionary definition. But now explain why this is important. How does this go back into your original argument, your thesis, right? The whys and the hows and the who fors and all that sort of stuff. Here's where you now get to explain it and you get to write a little bit more. Where the documents come in the DBQ is now whatever your argument was, whatever your position is, you take a document from time to time to prove your argument by making inferences from them. In a few moments, I'm going to explain that in more detail. Now, I'm always asked the question, how long should an essay be, Mr. Leonard? How long should they be? Well, once you ask how long, then you should realize that you shouldn't ask that question. In all honesty, I'm going to quote a very wise AP instructor, Dr. Hurl, who famously says, long essays aren't necessarily good, but a short essay, well, they're always bad. Remember, the more you write, the more you're going to say something. Don't limit yourself to just 4 or 5 paragraphs. There's no such thing as a 5-paragraph rule in APUSH. The more you write, the more you're going to tell your audience or the reader who will read this after the exam. You're trying to let them know that you actually know something about history. So write until your fingers fall off. Well, not literally, but it's a metaphor. Okay, the documents. Remember, this again is an essay about a question that's asked of you, not the documents. You don't quote a document. You don't take actual writing right out of the document, put in your essay. You're not trying to evaluate the documents in American history. You're not trying to write an essay where you say, well, this document is wrong and this document is right. Don't want to hear that. That is not what this essay is about. This essay, again, it's an essay, is about answering the question given you, not the documents. Now, you want to use as many as you can as you write the essay, but you don't want to use ones that you don't understand. If you don't understand a document, don't use it. There's nothing like taking a square block and trying to pound it into a round hole. Don't do that. And don't group the documents. I always tell my students don't do this. Documents are in chronological order, right? You're going to have some documents that are going to start at the very beginning of the time period that you're given and then toward the end. By putting them together, sometimes you're telling us that you don't really understand chronology. You don't understand how things happen. Now, yes, documents sometimes contradict each other. So this is what helps you then to write more paragraphs. You can always compare contrasts, even if your argument didn't ask you to do this. For instance, there was the great 1998 DBQ, Thomas Jefferson, Republicans are always strict constructionists, Federalists are always loose constructionists. Evaluate this particular statement. And you start writing your essay explaining how Jeffersonian Republicans believe in strict constructionism, and you talk about how that means when interpreting the Constitution. You bring out the certain facts that you know, but then you also know that sometimes Jeffersonian Republicans were loose constructionists. But that would be in 2 separate paragraphs. That might be in 2 separate sections of your essay. You'll use a document where you make an inference where there's strict constructionists in one part of your essay, And then there's another document that might contradict, but you use that later in your essay on your contrast end, which is perfectly allowable. When making an inference from a document, you refer to the document by title and letter. In essence, let's say it's document A. You write all this stuff, and there's a lot of things that you remember that from that document. It makes you think of other stuff. It makes you think of other facts, and you explain them, and you elaborate on it a little bit. And then at the end, when you're done, you think you've squeezed as much juice as you can out of document A. You make parentheses, and you write document A. That's why I wrote this paragraph, or that's maybe why I wrote 2 paragraphs. Maybe there were 2 paragraphs of information you got from document A. You never say in your actual essay, according to document A, or as you see in document A, don't do that. Never do that, because now you're taking away from what your essay actually is. And again, you're going back to writing about documents or evaluating documents. And that's not what we're doing here. All right, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Here's the 2008 DBQ question. Here's the command word, analyze. Analyze the ways in which the Vietnam War heightened social, political, economic tensions in the United States. Focus your answer on the period 1964-1975. So again, look at the question. The question's asking you basically, America was involved in the Vietnam War. It heightened social, political, economic tensions in the United States between this year, 1964, to 1975. 11 years. They're asking you to look at 11 years. Brainstorm on that for a little bit. Boy, they're really cutting my grass out there. Brainstorm on it for a little bit first. Right? Think of what you remember about the Vietnam War, who was the president, what was going on in America, different things like this. Then start looking at documents, whatever. So now you're ready to write your essay. And you're going to look at it from a social, political, economic point of view. And you're going to start writing, and things will come to you. And let's say document A. Document A was Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, 1964. And this is what was written there. Whereas the United States, in assisting the peoples of Southeast Asia to protect their freedom, because it says some more stuff in there that kind of gets boring. But it's this second part. Resolved by the Senate and the House of Representatives that Congress approves and supports the determination of the President as Commander-in-Chief to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. Now maybe you start to think, okay, this is the law that Congress passed that gave President Johnson the ability to fight this war. Well, what do you infer from this? What are some things that you could write about? Well, you could write about the escalation of the war. The war begins in 64, basically. Within 4 years, by 1968, 500,000 men are over there fighting. You might talk about socially how this created a negative situation with the draft. The majority of the American army was drafted, which is different than the World War II army, which was mostly volunteer, and how that led to a breakdown in the military. You might write that, you might remember that great word, blank check. Yes, this gave President Johnson a blank check. This gave him full authority to fight the Vietnam War without Congress declaring war. This brings up legality issues. Was this legal? Is Congress allowed to just give President war-making powers without declaring a war? Congress may not have known all the facts. Maybe there's some things Congress didn't know when Johnson's asking for this. I don't have this up here, but maybe you remember 1964 is an election year. This is just before the election of 1964. Johnson is trying to seem tough on communism. He doesn't want to be like Harry Truman, who allowed China to fall apart, as they say. He also knows that Kennedy was assassinated, and he's trying to play in the heartstrings of Americans. There's that famous quote about the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. This is from Johnson. Johnson speaking about that resolution, he says, it's like grandma's nightshirt. It covers everything, meaning it gave him full authority to do whatever he wanted. Maybe you remember the 2 ships that are involved, the USS Maddox, the USS Turner Joy. Maybe you remember that the Maddox was fired upon first on one day in August, and then a couple of days later, the 2 ships come back out here and they may or may not have been fired upon. Well, we now know that they were not fired upon. This was a radar malfunction, but it's that second day that Johnson uses to get the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. Now you write all about that stuff. You didn't quote that document. You didn't quote in the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. You didn't say according to document A. You don't say any of those things. You just write all about this, everything that you remember, and then when you're done, if it takes 2 paragraphs, 1 paragraph, maybe you can really get 3 paragraphs out of this one document. In the end, once you're done doing all you need to do with that particular document, you put in parentheses, document A. That's how I got all this inferences. Let me show you another example. Here's the DBQ from 2012. Okay, here's the question. In post-Civil War, post means after, the United States, corporations grew significantly in number, size, and influence. Analyze, so here's a command word, analyze the impact of big business on the economy and politics and the responses of Americans to these changes. Confine your answer to the period 1870-1900. Some things, again, what is this talking about? So it's asking you after the Civil War, how did corporations, and maybe you remember that other word, monopolies, grow in power and influence? And they're giving you the 3 categories: economy, economic, politics, politics. The responses of Americans, there's your social. So here you got your social, political, economic right here for you. Again, it helps you to develop your thesis by taking this question and turning it into a statement of how you're going to argue this, or what your argument is and how you're going to argue it. So once you've done that, let's look at document D. This was actually document D for this DBQ. The source, Joseph Kepler. I don't know who Joseph Kepler is. I've never heard of him. It doesn't matter. I see it says the bosses of the Senate, Puck. I do know Puck is a magazine. I see the year, January 23rd, 1889. Again, this time period, it talks about 1870 to 1900. This is the Gilded Age. So I look at this cartoon. I see gigantic human beings that say Steel Beam Trust, Copper Trust. There's Standard Oil. There's Iron Trust, Sugar Trust, Tin Trust, Coal, Paper Trust, Nail Trust in the back. The sign at the top says, this is a Senate of the monopolists, by the monopolists, for the monopolists. Entrance for the monopolists. And you see the senators are all tiny people. What's this trying to tell me? It's trying, see at the very top up here, I'll use my pointer. It says people's interest, where you and I could come in. It says closed, right? This is telling me a lot. There's a lot I can infer from this. There's a lot of inferences I can make. I know that the Senate, which is government, is now controlled by big business, or that's what that cartoon's trying to tell me. Maybe you remember the political machines of the time period, the political bosses who are in bed, as it were, in line with the big business, who are appointing these senators, who are now totally under the control of big business. People have no control over the Senate because at this time period, senators are not elected by the people. The monopolists or the trusts are very wealthy and powerful. They control many industries, or you could talk about various industries. You might even remember certain names. Standard Oil, J.D. Rockefeller. You might think of Andrew Carnegie in steel. You might think of J.P. Morgan in banks. This is a time period of the $1 billion Congress. Congress has $1 billion in control. There's this Speaker of the House, Thomas Reed. Crime of 73, McKinley Tariff. These things would help you also think about socially, looking at that political cartoon. You know that farmers were ones who were really hurt by this. When there was a panic of 1873, that Congress decided to take silver out of circulation, the Coinage Act of 73. Farmers called it the crime of 73. Almost 2 decades later, you get the McKinley Tariff, high tariffs. This hurt farmers because they have to grow a product that they sell in an unprotected market. They're paying these tariffs. They're paying too high. And they have no silver. They have nothing out there to help them financially, which eventually led to the beginning of the Populist Party. And one of the platforms, right? A platform are issues that people believe in. One of those platforms was to elect senators. Now, you would not want to talk really about the 17th Amendment because that did not come at this time period. The 17th Amendment comes later during the Progressive era. You may allude to the fact that later on we'd get a 17th Amendment, but that would be the only thing you'd want to do there. You don't want to go too far out of the range of the question because then you can get lost. But do you see here's a couple of good examples of how you can use the documents to make inference for yourselves and write more, write as much as you can so that you can really cover a lot of this information. Remember, don't panic. It's just an essay. You're going to write about everything that you can remember, and I wish you well on the exam.